Welcome to the Faculty Development Program on Chemistry, the Catalyst for Change. I am Dr. Balaji, currently working as Associate Professor in the School of Biotechnology at Jawaharlal Nehru University. So, my today's topic is Bioorthogonal Chemistry, an introduction and strategies. So, the today's journey will start with e-learning initiatives which I am currently doing. I will briefly talk about chemical biology, that is types of reactions and their mechanisms. What is bioorthogonal reactions? An introduction, types of reactions and a few applications. And finally, I will talk about some of our work on bioorthogonal chemistry. So, in the e-learning initiatives, we have first started the online course in JNU. Bioorganic chemistry is the course which I teach at JNU, which we have actually started in 2018 for the JNU students. This is our Vice Chancellor inaugurating this program. This had received media coverage also, like the local newspapers had covered this, and I am also currently working on creating massive open online courses. So, one of the course which I have created for organic chemistry has been running for 4 sessions, and we have consistently having a very high student enrollment. In July 2019, we had around 3,600 students, and in January 2020, we had around 3,250 students. So, because of the popularity, we have been asked to offer this course on every semester. So, in August 2020, we had around 2,600, because this is due to some COVID. There was a little bit less number of students who had registered, and in Jan 2021 we have 2,688 students who had registered for the course. And one of the great achievement of this course is the students who had registered for the course had already cleared couple of competitive examinations like CSIR NET, NIPER, JEE, IIT JAM, etc. And one more additional information is the course had attracted more than 2,000 faculty members as enrolled participants, and we are also offering this course currently in July 2021. We have already more than 650 students who are registered for the course. The course website is given here. Those who are interested can actually look into that and join, ask your MSc and even third year BSc student to join for this course. We have integrated couple of new innovative things like augmented reality and crossword puzzles in this particular course, which was covered in Times of India. So, JNU launches Organic Chemistry 1 MOOC to improve MSc pass percentage. And I have been participating in creation of online contents for Swayamprabha TV channel. So, here we had given some of the information regarding that. So, IIT Madras and myself coordinated to create crash courses to students in the rural area, especially during the COVID-19 lockdown. Many rural area students didn't get opportunity to learn because of locked colleges and universities. So, to reach those rural population, because they do not have a very good internet connectivity and mobile coverage, so the TV is the best option for them to reach, and this program has been actually running for several years by the Ministry of Education. So, we have started offering BSc level courses to these students. So, this was the initiative I have started, and we have created more than 500 hours of e-learning content for the students. And let us start with a primer, like before we even look into what is bioorthogonal chemistry. We will just go through very basic fundamentals which you are already familiar with. Say for example, when we talk about traditional organic chemist, what a traditional organic chemist does. So, he meticulously plans organic reactions, he does extensive literature search and survey, he devises elegant synthetic schemes, he runs the reactions in organic solvents, and he rigorously avoids water, especially using dry solvents or reagents for the reactions, and he is concerned with the sensitivity of oxygen and moisture and impurities during the reaction, and he does a careful water workup and isolates the product, and finally he completes the column chromatography laboriously to isolate the product. So, this is a traditional organic chemist who does the work, which you are already familiar with. And if you look at a traditional organic lab, this is a picture of a traditional organic lab. So, you can see the round bottom flask, oil bath, reflux condensers, solvents like toluene, dichloromethane, etc., and some of the reactions are run under inert conditions, and we also have The major drawback is like many of the reactions are very slow reactions, and of course you know how to do the separation. So this is a typical picture of a traditional organic chemistry lab. But when we move into the modern organic chemist, he uses combinations of reactions and he carries out even metal based reactions. Now the modern organic chemistry is mainly focused on stereoselective and stereospecific reactions, because in the drug development and other cases we do need a particular enantiomer for its high activity. So the modern organic chemist now focuses mainly on stereoselective and stereospecific reactions, and he conducts reactions using unconventional methods like microwave, supercritical solvents, etc. And he works on specialty chemicals, fine chemicals, smart materials, because now that there is a highly interdisciplinary research going on. I will just talk about that in a little bit later. And he employs SPLC and flash chromatography for separation of the compounds. And if you look at modern chemistry, organic chemistry lab, this looks like this. So people use microreactors, magnetic stirrers and hot plates, rotary evaporators, supercritical solvents, glove box, Schlenk techniques or Schlenk manifolds, and automated sample collection for the HPLC. So this is a pretty look of a modern organic chemistry lab. As I told, chemistry is now become a highly interdisciplinary area. Chemistry is now integrated with biology, biomedical engineering, pharmacology, nanotechnology, material science and environmental sciences. So these are all the various areas where chemistry is mainly used. And in fact, if you look at the Nobel Prize in chemistry, biochemistry had received more number of Nobel Prizes in chemistry than even organic chemistry, because if you look at pure organic chemistry, the number of Nobel received purely based on organic chemistry is only 20%, whereas biochemistry had received 23%. If you look at the list of the Nobel Prizes given in chemistry to biology, you can see even the latest 2020 for the development of method of genome editing had received a Nobel Prize in chemistry. So that means biology is becoming more, and if you look from 2002 to 2020, around 12 years, most of the time the chemistry Nobel Prize is given to biology. So this reiterates the fact that chemistry is becoming more and more interdisciplinary, especially in the biology field. So this is one of the reasons why I chose the topic on bioorthogonal chemistry for today's discussion. And if you look at this picture, you already know what this picture means, two cats and a clever monkey. So the biology is the monkey actually, which takes away the bread from both the chemistry and the medicine. The reason is, if you talk about when we talk about Nobel Prize, biology is not having a separate domain for receiving Nobel Prize. Chemistry is there, physiology or medicine is there, but biology is not present. So that is the reason biologists actually work in the interdisciplinary between chemistry and medicine, and they start receiving more number of Nobel Prizes. This brings to the next major area of focus, that is chemical biology. As we have seen earlier, the biology and chemistry are interrelated to each other. So that is how the chemical biology field had started. And here we will look at some basic things about what is chemical biology. So chemical biology is basically the study of chemicals and chemical reactions involved in biological process. Some of them include protein modification, probing biological pathways, like even if you look at many of the reactions like TCA cycle, Gibbs cycle and other reactions, most of the biological processes are being studied by chemical reactions. And if you look at very recent development, drug development, molecular and bioimaging are the important emerging areas from chemical biology. So this chemical biology includes disciplines of organic chemistry, biochemistry, cell biology, pharmacology, etc. And there are some recently important journals which also started publishing research articles. One is Nature Chemical Biology with an impact factor of 12.6. Current Opinion in Chemical Biology, which has an impact factor of 9.7, Cell Chemical Biology, ACS Chemical Biology, Chem Biochem, RSA Chemical Biology. So like that, there are plenty of journals which started in this particular area. And of course, the traditional journals, Journal of American Chemical Society, JOC, Chemical Biology and Drug Design, Chemical Reviews, Bioorganic and Medicinal Chemistry, still publish lots of papers on the interface, that is the chemical biology area. Let us look at some of the reactions from the chemical biology area. we have mentioned that this is an interface between chemistry and biology. So, in biological systems we have mainly amino acids or the proteins. So, the proteins are the main areas which are used for studying many biological pathways. So, the chemistry is now helping us to unravel the mystery of various biochemical processes. So, to know that, what we need to do is we have to modify the native proteins. So, how we can do the modification is based on some chemical reactions. Let us start with the basic thing like amines. Amines can react with an activated ester to give amide. So, this is a standard amide bond formation reaction. If you look at the literature, there are more than 25% of the known reactions or the reported reactions in the drug development field is basically amide bond formation reaction. And the next one is isocyanate, reaction of isocyanate and amine to give urea. Then reaction of sulfonyl chloride and amines to give sulfonamides, or the reductive amination of an aldehyde in the presence of a reducing agent to give amine. So, these are all some of the important reactions of amine. Let us look at the reaction mechanism of how an amine reacts with an activated ester to give an amide. So, this is the dicyclohexyl carbodiamide, which is the reagent, along with the starting material what we generally use. EDC is used, and when we use EDC, the EDC is actually used to activate the carboxylic acids. So, the carboxylic acid in the presence of a base gives a carboxylate anion, and the carboxylate anion reacts with this intermediate to produce our acyl urea. So, this is oxygen is having the acyl unit and this is a urea unit. So, O acyl urea is the intermediate that is formed, and this O acyl urea then reacts with the succinimide ester here. So, what we are going to form is the activated ester from this particular alcohol. So, this is a hydroxy group which reacts with the acyl, because this is more nucleophilic in nature, because this is having lone pair of electrons, and this carbonyl carbon is electrophilic species. The oxygen pulls the electron towards itself. So, this lone pair of electron on oxygen attacks this acyl carbon, carbonyl carbon, which leads to a tetrahedral intermediate as shown here. And on charge reversal, the acyl urea unit is knocked off, and we end up with the activated ester. And once the activated ester is formed, this now reacts with the amine, whatever is the amine we want to treat with. The amine is having a lone pair of electrons. So, this attacks again the same carbonyl oxygen, and this leads to the tetrahedral intermediate as shown here. In the charge reversal step, the activated ester is lost to give the amide as the final product. So, this is the overall reaction for the amine reacting with an activated ester to give the amide. So, this is one of the important reaction that is used in biological systems. And when we talk about the isocyanate reaction with an amine, the isocyanate undergoes attack by the nucleophilic nitrogen on the central carbon, because this carbon become more electrophilic. The nitrogen pulls the electron towards the double bond. The double bonded electrons are pulled towards the nitrogen. So, this carbon becomes electrophilic in nature. So, this electrophilic carbon is being attacked by the nucleophilic nitrogen, which leads to this kind of urea type intermediate. There is a proton transfer takes place from one of the nitrogen to the other nitrogen, which results in the final urea formation. So, this is how isocyanate reacts with an amine to give urea. And sulfonyl chloride reaction, you know already, this is a simple acid base reaction. So, in this reaction, the nucleophilic nitrogen attacks the sulfur, and with the concomitant removal of the halide ion, which leads to the overall loss of hydrogen chloride or hydrogen halide to give the sulfonamide derivative. And when we take the amide reaction, the amide can be converted to imine. So, this is the reaction we are looking at. Under the acidic condition, the oxygen is protonated, and this leads to this particular carbon, the aldehydic carbon, becoming more electrophilic in nature. The amine attacks this carbon, forms a tetrahedral intermediate. Proton transfer followed by loss of water leads to this particular imine formation. So, this imine is then reduced by mild reducing agents like sodium cyanoborohydrate to give the amine. So, that means overall reaction is an aldehyde is getting converted to amine. So, these are all some of the reactions which are generally used in the reactions of amine. The next important reaction is reactions of thiols with other substrates. So, the first one is the thiol can react with a suitable substrate, especially here the haloacetamide. This is a SN2 type reaction. So, thiol is the nucleophile which attacks this particular carbon by a SN2 mechanism with the loss of the iodide ion, leading to the formation of this particular ether type molecules. So, this is the one reaction, and then the thiols can react with Michael acceptors like maleimide. So, this leads to, this is basically a 1,4 addition type reaction. So, the sulfur adds to one of the carbon and the proton adds here. So, that is how we actually end up with the maleimide conjugation. So, thiol reacts with maleimides, and the another important reaction is the thiol-ene coupling reactions. So, in this particular case, an alkene is treated with thiol in the presence of this is basically a photochemical reaction, either light source or the photons are used, or even sometimes heat can be used. So, this breaks the SH bond, which is a very mild bond that produces a radical, and the radical undergoes addition to the alkene. The process is basically a anti-Markovnikov addition. We will see the mechanism soon. So, let us look at what is this thiol-ene coupling we have been seeing now. So, this was actually discovered by Posner in 1905, and this started wide use from 1990s onwards. This is an important approach to build carbon sulfur bonds, especially many of the proteins have sulfur, that is cysteine is present. So, that sulfur is very good place for addition. So, for forming the carbon sulfur bonds, this thiol-ene coupling reaction can be used. So, in this reaction, the another name given is like hydrothylation. This is an organic reaction. This is a radical reaction which is occurring between a thiol and an alkene to give the end product thioether. And as I mentioned, the product formation is governed by anti-Markovnikov addition. So, as we know, the initiation step is the thiol SH bond is broken by a radical initiator to give the thiol radical. So, this thiol radical adds to the alkene to give this particular radical intermediate. So, the first step is the initiation reaction, the second one is the propagation reaction, and then finally it is terminated by another additional thiol molecule to give the required thioether, and we also end up with the thiol radical. So, this reaction can continue like this, and this is very widely used in biological system because this is a metal free reaction. And additionally, if the alkene is a Michael acceptor, then the reaction proceeds via ionic mechanism. So, we will see some of the examples here. Dihydroalanine, DHA, or maleimide moiety, which we have seen as a simple Michael acceptor, can also undergo reaction using thiol-ene type coupling reactions. So, here when we look at different reactivity of thiols with various Michael acceptors, the maleimide derivative reacts very fast, and this is the DHA, this is the amino unit, carboxylic acid unit, and this is the dihydroalanine, and this is the amide unit, and this is the ester acrylate, this is acrylate esters, and this is acrylamides, and these actually have a little bit lesser reactivity than maleimide. And when we look at the stability of the product, the maleimide derivatives are not highly stable, whereas the acrylamide condensed products are highly stable, and this is used in the thiol sugar synthesis, carbohydrates chemistry, and peptide modifications. And of course, thiol can react with other substrates, other thiols, to give the disulfide bond formation. So, here some of the examples are given here, like the reaction with the thiosulfate, thiosulfonate, 2-pyridyl disulfide, 4-pyridyl disulfide, or TNB like thiols. So, all these are having the SS linkage. So, this can be replaced by reaction with another thiol. So, this is a formation of disulfide bond. So, thiols can also be used for the particular bond formation. So, the ideal condition for protein modification requires the functional group should be tolerance or compatibility should be there, and selectivity and specificity is very crucial for the reactions. Water as the reaction medium is another important thing, because when we run many of the organic reactions, we can run basically the reaction in an organic solvent, but in the biological systems most of the time the reaction has to be carried out in aqueous condition. So that puts another problem, because there will be lots of nucleophilic species which are moving around in the system. So the ideal condition for protein modification has to take care of all these things, and of course the reaction has to happen near at or near neutral pH, because physiological pH is 7.4. So if you have to modify a biological system, then preferably the reaction should be carried out close to the neutral pH conditions, and the temperature should be room temperature or at the maximum 37 degree, that is the standard biological system temperature. So we cannot run low temperature reactions or high temperature reactions in the biological systems. And of course we need a very high reaction rates, because many organic reaction takes sometimes days to completion or even hours to completion. So those kind of slow reactions are not suitable for running under biological or the protein modification conditions. And another important thing is we cannot use concentration more than 1:1 equivalent, because this is also another important constraint, because if you look at simple amide bond formation in the case of activated esters, we do need to use a little bit higher amount of the activated esters to make the amine undergo complete reaction. So these kind of reactions are quite tricky to carry out, and the reactions or the conditions what we use should avoid toxic reagents. So these are all some of the ideal conditions which are very essential for running biochemical reactions. Let us look at protein bioconjugation required. See, if you are going to do bioconjugation on a protein, so what are the steps, we will just see. Now the first question we will ask is the protein in a complex mixture or not? Then the next question what we ask is site specificity required or not? So if the site specificity is not required, then we can look for lysine modification with NHS ester, which we have seen, that is N-hydroxysuccinimide ester modification of the lysine can be done, because it can modify many of the lysines. We may not be very specific about it. Then if we need to add additional bioconjugation, then we can actually look at other methods also. Now how the protein is produced is the next question we will be asking, and it can be a natural one. If it is a naturally produced protein, then we can consider targeting cysteine, lysine, tryptophan, tyrosine tryptophan, N-terminal residues, all these things can be considered. If the protein is actually expressed one, then we have to look at can we introduce a cysteine moiety into this molecule. If we can actually introduce a cysteine moiety, then we can go for the maleimide modification what we have seen. If cysteine cannot be introduced, then we have to look for other places. So then the next question is does the protein has any N-terminal containing free amino group, that is not N-acylated or N-substituted. If it is having a free amino group, then we can actually look at transamination reaction, Pictet-Spengler reaction, and a similar reaction to modify that protein. If even there is no free amino group, then it is not possible by the normal modification methods. So when we have to do the protein bioconjugation, these are all the various steps which we can follow to identify what type of modifications can be carried out on that particular protein we can do. So now we had come up to a method where normal modification is not possible on the protein. So then how do we go about it? So when there is it's not possible for the normal modification, we have several methods which we can actually introduce. Can we add a cysteine to the C-terminal, because so far we have been seeing about only the N-terminal one. Now we have to look at the C-terminal. Can we add a cysteine to the C-terminal? If we can add a cysteine to the C-terminal, then we can actually follow native chemical ligation and we can actually modify the protein. Okay. If the C-terminal we cannot use cysteine, then do we have a possibility of introducing non-natural amino acids? So this is also another option we can look into. When we are introducing a non-natural amino acid, then we can look for secondary modifications. So, there are various non-natural amino acids are available which can be introduced into the protein, then we can look for the secondary modification of the same. Otherwise, we can also add peptide tags to the protein under consideration. So, like biotin ligase, transglutaminase. So, these kind of tags can be added so that we can actually monitor how the protein actually interacts with other functionalities. Then there is also another important thing we can think of is, can we introduce an additional protein domain? So, if we can do additional protein domain introduction, then we can actually look at SNAP tag or halo tag. So, these are some of the methods by which the protein can be modified when the normal modifications are possible.